All right, I want to thank everybody. I haven't seen you all. I want to thank you for coming to the PLC 2024, hosted by St. Michael's and the Jewett here in Plymouth. And we have a great speaker, as you can tell by the number of people in the room. We had to move out tables. Father Ted Pulcini. I have his bio here. I won't read everything about him.
Yes. I'm bored by it. You would be more bored by it, I'm sure.
But he taught briefly at many schools, St. Vladimir's, New York. He's an esteemed professor. He was a priest at Lowell for 3 years.
Yes, and then in Chambersburg for 24 years.
Written books.
Yes. I don't know how many people read them, but libraries buy them.
And taught.
I taught I taught for a semester at St. Vladimir Seminary, and then Dickinson College in Pennsylvania made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I never thought I'd end up in my home state of Pennsylvania, but I did, and then I was there for the next 24 years. And as a result of teaching at Dickinson, it gave me the opportunity to start the parish in Chambersburg, which went from a mission to a parish.
And still working, still retired?
Well, retirement, my first I retired for 5 years, I've been retired. And at the beginning, my retirement was a nightmare of overcommitment. I'm doing campus ministry. When I was teaching at Dickinson, I couldn't do campus ministry with students. That would be a conflict of interest. But now that I'm retired, I can be the campus ministry for the Orthodox faculty and for the students. And I do a Bible study there weekly, and I have liturgy there once a month. And all the people belong to local parishes, but they all live in the Carlisle area. So there's a little community that's forming of the Orthodox in that area. So, and then I'm doing retreats. I'm going to try to cut that down too. But I've kept busy.
So if none of you or any of you have either heard Father Ted speak or don't know anything about him, as you can see by the popularity here, you're in for a treat. He's doing today, Faith, Why Do We Lose It? And tomorrow, Faith, How Do We Get It Back?
That's it.
And so sit back and enjoy Father Ted's presentation.
Thank you, Thank you for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be back in New England. I mean, in many ways, if you spend time in New England in a parish, as I did, both as a deacon and then as a priest, you leave part of yourself behind in New England. When I come back here, I feel like this is home. I'm not going to a strange territory. And that's the way I feel now. The connections I had, especially with people at St. Mary's in Cambridge all those years ago, I still feel fresh in me. So it's just good seeing people. The topic. The worst part about preaching or giving a retreat is coming up with a topic. I always found that to be the case. And so, when Soraya and Father James said, we want you to come and speak at the Parish Life Conference, I said, I'd be glad to do that, but you have to come up with a title. You have to come up with a topic. So he said, no, we can't do it. You suggest some topics. Sayidna suggested he send me a whole list, and I came up with this topic about faith. Why is it that we lose it, and how do we get it back? I only have 2 hours to discuss this, and I'm just going to give you some thoughts to chew on, because we talk about faith all the time, and I don't think we really know what we're talking about. How many of you in your childhood or your young adulthood read C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves? Okay, some of you, I know, especially my age group, you read this. We use the word love all the time, but it can mean so many different things. And C.S. Lewis's book on the Four Loves broke it down, gave a good analysis of all the many things that love involves. Eros, storge, philia, agape, the 4 kinds of love. Well, I'm going to do that. And believe me, I'm not putting myself in the same category as C.S. Lewis, but I'm saying I want to give some ideas about faith, because we use faith a lot, and I don't think we really understand what faith consists in. We have a set of ideas we associate with faith, but when it really comes down to it, we have to explain what it is. We don't really feel able to give a definition that really suffices. We lose faith. This is my basic point. All of us do to some extent. We lose faith because we don't understand what's really required to maintain faith. It's multifaceted. So I'm going to give, in the first talk, some idea of how the idea of faith needs to be filled in our minds and hearts. And why it is that we lose faith, the basic answer is because we have an anemic, insufficient understanding of what faith is. We let it die, and then we have to more fully understand what it involves, what it entails, what it includes, if we're going to be able to restore faith. Now, 2 or 3 people, as I was coming in, said to me very honestly and forthrightly, you know, Father, I'm struggling with my faith. Some things have happened, and I really do struggle with my faith. Well, I have to tell you, if I'm honest, I would say the same thing. Who of us hasn't struggled with our faith in one way or another? And I think what we have to do is sort of broaden out, complete what it is we understand faith to be, and then in restoring it, make sure we take seriously all those elements. Okay? All right. Let me tell you. Every morning, I wake up. First thing I do is first I have to go to the bathroom after sleeping. I go to the bathroom, I come back, and I do my exercises for my sciatica. Because if I have to go to the doctor, he'll scold me. He says, if you're doing the exercise, I want to be able to say yes, even if I'm not consistent. The second thing I do is I say my prayers using the Encounter app from Faith Tree. I'll say more about that later. And then I go to my computer. Even before I turn my Keurig on and have my coffee, I go and I read the news that comes. There's a service that I'm the beneficiary of. There it is. Called Microsoft Start. Okay? Now, Microsoft Start is just a news aggregator that the Microsoft network editors put together every day. There's a whole list of news articles from different newspapers, different magazines, even sometimes interviews from different people. I began to notice something when I was looking at Microsoft Start this past winter. I noticed that almost every day, there was an article or an interview chosen by the editors of Microsoft Network that had to do with faith. Believe it or not, this is a secular news aggregator, nothing particularly religious about it. And it was every day or every other day, there was an article. I just want to give you what I found in 2 weeks' time, the articles. Watch this. 19 ways to rekindle your faith in God again, which of course assumes you've lost your faith in God. All right? Then there's another 12 reasons why American Christianity is rapidly falling apart. Rapidly capitalized. It's not my editing, it's their title. 15 reasons why Christians are losing faith in their church. Any of this ringing any bells with some of you?
Clickbait.
15 reasons why some ex-Christians left their faith. These is all within 2 weeks. All right? Faith's fall. 25 grim reasons behind the exodus of American Christians from Christianity. You can almost hear the crescendo of eerie music in the background. All right? Losing our religion. We've always had the freedom to choose our own paths. I'm not making this up, by the way. I have links to all these articles. If you don't believe me, email me, I'll send you the links. 17 blunt and honest reasons people turn their backs on religion. By the way, 17 is the favorite number they use in these things for giving reasons for things. 17 reasons why millennials have a problem with religion. Felt betrayed. Reasons why Christianity is experiencing a mass exodus. I mean, can you believe this? This is a recurring theme in a secular news aggregator. 19 reasons more people are saying no to religion and yes to atheism. 19 reasons why Christianity is dying in the USA. 17 is back. 17 reasons people feel disconnected from church today. And 21 disturbing reasons behind youth exodus from the Catholic Church. put in Orthodox or Catholic, it can still apply to us, right? All right, this is something that's a sociological fact. The loss of faith is not just something that happens in a little corner of the world among odd people who still are church practitioners. It's a societal trend. And it's gotten a lot of attention. I don't know how much. I have to admit something. I watch a lot of YouTube. And I watch a lot of the interviews and analyses that are on YouTube. And a lot of people, let me see if I can backtrack here. Oh no, what have I done, Richard?
What?
Save him, Richard.
Yeah.
Yes, save me here.
Michael's coming to help.
Help is on the way.
I know. The technicians come to do their thing.
One reason why you don't do these presentations.
This is the screen I want. So all I need is that stored.
That's all right.
Okay, that's it. Oh,
No, just,
all right. A lot of commentators relate this to an apocalyptic warning they see in the book of 2 Thessalonians. There's a passage in 2 Thessalonians that has always intrigued me. I never really knew what it meant, but a lot of people have zeroed in on this and saying, we know why there are so many instances of loss of faith. This is a fulfillment of the prophecy of St. Paul in 2 Thessalonians. Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our assembling to meet him, we beg you, brethren, not to be quickly shaken in mind or excited, either by spirit or by word or by letter, purporting to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. For that day will not come unless the apostasia, usually translated as rebellion, comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed. The man of lawlessness is typically known as the Antichrist. So a lot of people see this as a prophecy, a foreboding of the coming of Antichrist and the end of time. Apostasy, lack of faith, is one of the situations that must arrive before the Antichrist comes. So this loss of faith is really attracting a lot of attention in commentators all over the place. So it's of interest to us personally, but it's of interest to people who look at the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and see this as a necessary thing. Okay.
pointed towards the
Okay. Now, all those articles I went through, each of these articles expresses a distinctive viewpoint, but a set of themes recurs in them, themes which I would characterize as faith corrosives. Once the situation is developed, the faith begins to disappear, to evaporate, to be eaten away at. There are certain factors that corrode it, and we'll get to these in a minute. Now, I want to say that for faith to be authentic, and this is my basic point, we have to look at its essential components. Just as C.S. Lewis did with love, we have to do with faith. We think we know exactly what faith is. Basically, faith to us is like something that you would assert belief in, even though there's not proof for it. That's a very impoverished understanding of faith. And most commentators, both in the Christian West and the Christian East, in the patristic literature about the Latin West and the Greek and Syriac East, there's an idea that faith involves more than just the mind, intellectual assent to doctrinal beliefs. There is the mind of faith. The first aspect, and this is those of you who may come from Protestant backgrounds, Protestant reformers even stress this. The first constituent element of faith is what in Latin is called notitia, knowledge. This is we all understand. When we go to seminary and we learn theology, you have to understand what the doctrines are about. How do you explain the Trinity? How do you explain the hypostatic union? How do you explain these things? That's what notitia is, learning about it, intellectual work. The second element of the mind of faith is assensus, which means assenting to it. So that, do you believe this? Yes, I believe it, which means I give intellectual assent to it. So faith, it's true, involves intellectual belief. That's the mind of faith. But faith also has an aspect that I would call the heart of faith. There are aspects which are experiential, not intellectual, which are a constitutive part of faith. This, the Latin word for this, is fiducia, trusting. Those of you who are in finance know what a fiduciary is. Well, it's the same Latin root, trusting, all right? So faith does not just mean intellectual assent to a body of doctrine, but it means trusting experientially in the source of that doctrine. This is much more difficult to get a handle on. This is true with the Greek word pistevo. If you ever gone to Greek church and you say the creed, how does the creed begin? Pistevo is ena theon. I believe in one God. All right? The word pistevo in Greek we translate facilely as I believe, but it implies so much more. In classical Greek, the term pistos doesn't just mean belief, it means trusting, with a nuance of obedience. Pistevo meant, if you say pistevo, I believe in the sense that I trust that person or thing, and I'm willing to be obedient to it. Apistos means distrustful or untrustworthy. Pistevo thus primarily means to trust and to obey. So there's this experiential commitment, not just an intellectual assent, but a commitment of one's experience and person to trust and to obey. In early texts, pistos means primarily trust. All right? In later Stoic texts, it means faithfulness. You know what it's related to in Hebrew? Okay, you know the scripture in Hebrew was translated into Greek, which is the basis of our Orthodox Old Testament. What was that Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible? The Septuagint, all right? And when the Septuagint was translating the Hebrew, it was based on the root aleph mim nun, which is the basis for the word amen that we use, which means I affirm it or I believe it, all right? In the New Testament, by the time we get to the New Testament, pistis means both trust and faith. All right, so the first point I want to make is you have to have this idea that faith is not just belief in doctrines. We make that assumption to our detriment because we think that if we have an understanding of basic doctrines and say, I believe it, then our faith is secure. It's not. So there's a new perspective that comes with this. By the way, this changes the way you can interpret biblical text. Remember before Pascha this year, because Pascha was so late, we had a number of readings sandwiched in before we got to Holy Week. And one of them was in Mark 9. This is the story about a man who has a son who's possessed by an evil demon, all right? A deaf and mute demon. And Jesus walks into a crowd and sees all the people milling about, and this man brought his son. And he brought his son to the disciples of Christ. And he said, this is my son, he's possessed by a demon. It throws him down, he grinds his teeth, and he foams at the mouth. And so, okay, they take him he takes this boy of his, he's very distraught by this, to the disciples. They're not able to cast him out. So Jesus comes, and he asks what's going on. And the man comes up, he says, I brought my son to your disciples to cast out this demon, which is out to kill him. It wants to throw him into the water, throw him into the fire. He's foaming at the mouth, he's grinding his teeth, and your disciples could not cast it out. And Jesus says, oh, you faithless generation. He calls the man. He says, how long has your boy had this? He said, since childhood. And so what happens is the man says to him, your disciples couldn't cast him out. Might you be able to help me? Is there anything that you can do? And remember what Christ says, can. And he says, anything is possible to him who is faith. And the word there is pistemi, is it believes. Okay? And the man says in Greek, pistevo voithimu theapistia. I believe, help thou my unbelief, is the way it's usually translated. Now, I don't think that's a good translation. Pistevo, he says, I believe. He did believe. He was looking for Jesus. He brought his son to Jesus because he said, I believe this man can help me. He's healing all kinds of people. So in terms of what he thought, he said, this Jesus is a sure source of the healing. This will be fine. And so, then he says, when he says, I believe, and I think that was obvious, the fact that he sought out Jesus to have his son cured. Then he says, voithimu theapistia. I think it's better translated, I believe, but help my lack of trust. Because he didn't think maybe that Jesus would be able to do anything more than his disciples were. And he believed that he could, but he didn't know whether he should trust Jesus any more than he trusted the disciples. It came to nothing with the disciples. Should he trust Jesus to bring a different result? And when he says, help thou my lack of trust, that's when Jesus cures him. All right? This is, I think, how this distinction between pistevo, entailing not just belief, but also trust, comes into play. Saint Simeon, the new theologian, was one of my favorite patristic writers. You know, the three people in Orthodox theology called the theologian. Who's the first one? St. John the theologian. The second one? Gregory the theologian, Gregory of Nazianzus. The third died in 1022, and that was Simeon the new theologian. And he has a treatise called On Faith. And what he talks about, he does not define faith in terms of intellectual assent to doctrines. He tells a story of a man named George, which many scholars think he's talking about himself in disguise. And he describes this George in Constantinople, who's a very presented, well-educated man, and he wants to grow in his faith. All right? And so he goes to try to find out how it is he can become a holy person, a person of faith. And so he finds an old monk. And the old monk says, I'm not going to tell you about doctrine. I'm not going to give you all these theoretical explanations that engage the mind. You want to become holy? You want to grow in faith? He says, trust in God. Trust, totally. And this, of course, the young men find hard to do. Even in our politics, by the way, what do our politicians say? We want to talk about how we trust our enemies. What's the refrain they say? Trust, but verify. And that's the way he thought. So what does the monk do? He gives him a spiritual rule. And this man, George, who's probably Simeon in disguise, begins doing it. And he starts to grow in faith. He has overwhelming personal, experiential dimensions to his faith. He sees light, and he feels the effulgent light filling his life, and he realizes this did not happen because he had intellectual assent to anything, but because he followed the advice to trust in God, and, here's the important part, to trust in this monk who gave him the rule to follow. It was trust, both in terms of his relationship with God and his relationship to others, that enabled him to have this faith that otherwise was evaporating or not growing at all. Keep that story in mind, because the trust that we have in God, this is a basic thing I want to stress, the trust we have in God is based on the trust we learn to have in people. We can't know God directly. An axiom of Orthodox theology is God is unknowable in his essence. We know God by analogy. And if we have faith in God, it's because we've been trained also to have faith in people and in institutions. Without that kind of faith in our direct human experience, we don't find it possible to have faith and trust in God. By the way, let me bring this to Massachusetts here. Where's Stockbridge? I don't even know where it is.
Western.
Western. I don't know whether you ever watched this TV show on cable called EWTN.
Yeah.
It's a Catholic station. And there's a devotion there that I was channel surfing one day. And they have a devotion called the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. Any of you familiar with it? All right, some of you know it. The Chaplet of Divine Mercy. By the way, I love it did you notice it includes all these Orthodox prayers in it? Part of it, the people are singing, Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us. It says, oh, they know which prayers to steal. They're really good. And so there's a shrine of the Divine Mercy in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. I said I have to bring this up. This will hit home with the people from Massachusetts. And I have seen the icon that the Divine Mercy devotion focuses on. You've probably seen it. And it wants to foster faith and belief in Christ, all right? Here's the icon. There it is. And look what's inscribed at the bottom. Jesus, I trust in you. This is the essence of the faith that this devotion is striking to build. You can talk about all the doctrines they wanted people to believe, but they want this relationship to develop on the part of the participants in this pious chaplet of mercy that enables them to place their trust. The essence of faith involves more than intellectual assent, but this kind of experiential trust. Faith, even in the New Testament, is based on an experiential dimension of obedience. If you really trust in a person, you're going to obey them. And if you look at chapter 11 of the letter to the Hebrews, which I think you've all heard, we read it in the epistle readings of the liturgy. Now, faith is assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. We all accept that, right? We think that's what faith is. We say we believe in it even though we can't see it or verify it, all right? But the chapter gives a much broader understanding of what that faith implies. By it, the men of old received divine approval. By faith, we understand that the world was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made out of things which did not appear. Then it goes through a whole list of people, all right? And the people who are seen as the exemplars, the paragons of faith, are not people who had intellectual understanding of doctrine, but people who were obedient because they had made that experiential commitment of trusting a person. You can tell I'm not going to go through all of them. Why is Abel seen as a good one? Who killed Abel? Cain. Because Abel was obedient to what God wanted. I don't know precisely why God wanted meat rather than vegetables, but I think maybe you can understand that. Enoch. Anyone know the story of Enoch? It's in Genesis 5. It talks about all these people who lived. Only one of them did not die. That's Enoch. And it says when Enoch was 365 years old, what a man, he became the father. Anyone know who the son of Enoch was? The guy who lived longest in the book of Genesis. Methuselah, who, by the way, lived 969 years. I hope his 401k was really long. All right? And it says about Enoch, of all the other people listed in Genesis 5, it says, and he lived 969 years, and he died. Then, but it says about Enoch, he always was obedient to God. And it doesn't say, and then Enoch died. It says, and then he walked with God, for God took him in obedience. He had been so obedient, his trusting in God, expressed through obedience, made him not die. By the way, who's the other person in the New Testament who did not die? Elijah. And so what's the tradition? At the end of time, before the end of time, who was going to appear, because they're available, they never died, was Elijah and Enoch, two witnesses. But my point is, Enoch had this privileged stance because he never died. In his obedience, he was seen as walking with God out of this life, in the same way that Elijah was taken up in the fiery chariot. Okay? Noah, you know the story of Noah. Of all the world, he was the obedient one, and he survived the flood. Abraham, in obedience, look what it says, by faith, Abraham, doesn't say by faith Abraham understood, it said by faith Abraham obeyed. All right? And he left Ur of the Chaldees and went to the land promised to him. By faith Moses left all that he had in the comfort of his life, not knowing intellectually what was going to happen, but he trusted. And he trusted, and out of obedience he did what God wanted. And then they list other heroes. And look what it says about Rahab. Rahab the harlot, all right, which enabled the conquest of Jericho. All right, it says, Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient. In other words, not those who did not have an understanding of doctrine, but those who didn't have the trust to the extent that they were willing to obey. Because she had given friendly welcome to the spies. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. The point is, these were men of faith, not because of intellectual assent, but because of experiential trust and what that entailed in terms of how they lived in obedience. Here's the main point, and I want to develop this and then take some questions and discuss it. Faith is therefore multifaceted, just as love was multifaceted. And until the work of C.S. Lewis, we didn't quite understand what those facets were. I want to point out in this first presentation that faith is therefore multifaceted, involving a set of interrelated components. It is not just intellectual of the mind, but also relational of the heart. The glossary, if you look at the version of the Philokalia that most of us have, the one edited by a blessed memory Metropolitan Callistus Ware and Mother Maria, all right? There's a glossary in there. And I looked up pistis, the word that's usually facilely translated as belief, is not only an individual or theoretical belief, this is his words now, not mine, in the dogmatic truths of Christianity, but an all-embracing relationship, an attitude of love and total trust in God. So you see, I'm not making this up. This is something that is theologically fundamental to a correct understanding of faith, and we usually don't have it. People who say, I lose my faith, I don't think they're losing the intellectual ability to understand doctrine, but the relational connection they had with God was always very superficial, quite iffy, quite compromised. And then when something bad happens, it doesn't stand that test, and that's what has to be revived if faith is going to be found again. Let me give you an example here. This will ring a bell. I have a $20 bill here. All right? If I go to any bank, even in Massachusetts, they'll respect my money from Pennsylvania. All right? This will work. But if I take this, I'm not going to tear it because I understand it's against the law to destroy money. I'm still not going to tear it because I want to use it. If I tear it in half and I take 49% of this, let's figure half of it is gone, to the bank and said, I want 2/10 for this. The teller's going to say, no. It's not functionally a $20 bill anymore. That's the way we deal with faith. We take what's a full understanding of faith, we deal it only with one aspect of it, like the intellectual assent, and then we wonder why it doesn't function right. Kadish? This is what happens. To have the full functional value of the dollar, of the $20, you need both parts of it. In the same way, to have the full understanding of what faith entails, you need to have not just the intellectual assent, but the experiential dimension as well. It becomes feeble, bitter, anemic, unstable. I was trying to think of all the words I never want to hear from my doctor. Because the aforementioned corrosives of faith corrupt the mind and the heart of faith. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about how faith is corroded in us. And this, I think you'll see a lot of things in your experience that would make this very true. All right. What corrodes the mind of faith, that intellectual assent dimension? Let me tell you, if I were Satan, I've been accused of worse. If I were Satan, I would tell people this is the way you destroy faith. First of all, you corrupt both aspects of it. The intellectual assent aspect of it. First of all, does this ring true? When someone asks about doctrine and you try to explain doctrine to them, what does salvation consist of? What is the Trinity? Why is Christ essential? What does salvation entail? You know, I taught college for 40 years, all told. One thing that I saw manifested consistently in my students, they said, I don't want you telling me what to believe. They want autonomy, all right? They are their own law, autonomos, their own law. They're autonomous, and they reject heteronomy. In other words, someone else telling them what is true and what to believe. They want to be able to set that. And one of the things in our culture that makes the acceptance intellectually of doctrine so difficult is people who are educated and see themselves as informed, see that as an exercise of someone who wants to control them, of heteronomy. They reject it because they want to be autonomous. The mind, the mental, the intellectual aspect of faith gets undercut because people see it, especially younger people, but also a good many adults, let's be honest. Let's not vilify the young just because we envy them. The fact is, they see it as a compromising of their autonomy. This is a big one. Political entanglement. When Christian doctrine becomes entangled with political ideologies, you get the situation that you have in this country right now, and I will not say much about it, but I just want to point it out. You have political movements who take some of the accoutrements of Christian doctrine and throw a sacralized cover on it, and then they say this is consistent with Christian doctrine. Of course, the church across the street, which also claims to be Christian, is teaching the exact opposite. They both are using it to validate their point. I had a student who was one of the most devout students I ever had. I mean, the kid was just amazing. And he said, I need to have lunch with you. Whenever my students call me and they want to have lunch, I said, I'm going to go where I'm not going to really concentrate on the food because this is going to turn out one way or another to be a counseling appointment. And we sit down and he said, I said, are you still involved in the blank church that you were involved in? I'm not going to give the denomination. And he said, no, I've fallen away from it. I've rejected it. And I said, why? He said, because the substance of the faith, the doctrine that I was taught, was inextricably bound up with the political views of this particular pastor. And I'll have none of it. It actually went to ruin his marriage because his wife was of the same political strain and the same sort of co-opting of Christianity to a political end because she accepted the political entanglement. All right? I'm telling you, one of the ways that the evil one tries to undercut intellectual assent to doctrine is taking that doctrine and interweaving it, entangling it, making it inextricably bound to some kind of political or financial viewpoint. And I'm not going to say anything more because I don't want to be driven out of town on a rail by any of you. But I'm telling you, all you've got to do is turn on any news, left or right, and everyone's doing it. And this is what undercuts the assent of people to belief in doctrine. This is a big one. Intellectual dissonance. I love this. Why? How many of you have kids in college or have had kids in college? I taught at Dickinson.
I went to college.
You went to college. That's almost as good as any. I have to tell you, Dickinson, where I taught, and I love the place. What little I have left in my inheritance, part of it will go to Dickinson. But I have to tell you, one of the things that we really stress, over 70% of our students studied abroad in a culture different from what they knew, all right? And they go, and what's the purpose? The purpose was to expose them to different worldviews. Weltanschauung, as the Germans would say. Different worldviews. And to make them see that their beliefs, obviously, are just arbitrary based on who brought them up and where they lived, all right? But you don't have to travel abroad. Listen, how many of us, we pride ourselves on our ethnic background. I grew up, and I always say I grew up in concentric circles, all right? I had a stable, nuclear family, 8 kids in my father's family, all of whom married and had children, 4 in my mother's, all of whom married and had children. I had scores of first cousins, all right? The thing is, we were all pretty much the same. We all traced our ancestry back to the same grandparents whom we revered, all right? The neighborhoods in which we lived, I mean, where was St. John's? Hudson Street?
Yeah.
Gee, most of the people around, the people who lived at Hudson Street were Syrian. And even Lebanese were called Syrian in those days, all right?
Yes.
You had that. Neighborhoods. were like, I never could understand it. They hated the old country. My mother and his father's mother both came from the same area of Italy. They moved to Pittsburgh and to my hometown, Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. Then they bought houses right in the same neighborhoods of all the people who were from the same village in the old country. So they couldn't get away from them. They brought the old country there with them. All right? What I'm saying is they lived in an ideologically and culturally consistent world. All right? The people were speaking the same language, at least in an uneducated, maybe, what's the word I want? What's the dialectical way? All right, that even gave a closer understanding of who was really on your team and who wasn't, if you spoke the same dialect. The thing is, there were no real challenges to their worldview. If you were Greek, you were Orthodox. If you were Italian, you were Catholic. If you were Irish, you were Catholic. If you were Polish, you were Catholic, that sort of thing. If you were Scandinavian, you were Lutheran. If you were Scottish, you were Presbyterian. You could almost predict by the last name what religion people were. All right? Is that right? I mean, I think that's most of our experiences. My point is, even in this country now, we live in pluralistic neighborhoods. Are all your neighbors Orthodox? Are all your neighbors Syrian or Lebanese or Palestinian or Jordanian? No. And your kids playmate. I mean, I love when you have names like, the last name was Della Femina, good Italian name. And the first name is Brian. You know, it's so funny. Or, you know, you have a name like Conrad Abuala. I mean, this is America. The cultures all get intermixed. The fact is, once you have the intermixing of cultures, in school, in the neighborhoods, even in families, you have all these competing worldviews. And after a while, doesn't this happen? People say, oh, it doesn't bother me that my daughter married a Presbyterian. After all, it's all the same God. In other words, the spirituality dulls the ability to distinguish between one set of doctrines and another. Unless you really see the differences and want to understand them, and why one understanding might be more acceptable than another. All right? This eats away at the intellectual component of faith because it drives us all to the fact that there are many viewpoints out there. All right? I mean, the way I look at it is American diet. How many of us have Chinese background? Okay, a couple. 1, 2. How many of us have eaten Chinese food? Every day if I could. All right? The thing is, we accept ideas from other things. How often we talk about, I hear Orthodox talking about karma all the time. Finally, karma is a word that's used in technical Orthodox theology. We have this idea that our doctrinal sensibilities have been dulled because we have this intellectual dissonance now. What used to be a uniform sort of world has now become a diverse one. And that makes the acceptance of a consistent pattern of doctrine all the more difficult. I'm always very concerned. As you know, this is a topic for another day, and I'll talk about this a little bit in the next section of what I do. All these converts coming in to our faith, right? We're always glad to have new people. But I have to tell you, why are people converting? And I think a lot of people convert in what I call contra conversions. In other words, they're converting away from something. They're converting against something they don't like in their former religious affiliation or lack thereof. But I always ask them, what are you converting to? But when they begin to say, I am Orthodox because I'm not, fill in the blank, that makes me very suspicious. And because what it shows is these people want something that simplifies the dissonance that they live with and makes it easier to deal with. This, even for people who then become very committed to say Orthodoxy or any new religious tradition they're converting to, still they're not doing it because they're giving assent to a set of doctrines that they're accepting. They're giving rejection to a set of doctrines they no longer want to be adhering to. Did I make that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is something I think we have to be. Religious globalization, that's just another view of what I just talked about. You know, I had a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. He was a sociology professor. And I was lucky enough to get a teaching fellowship with him, because the teaching fellows in the Department of Sociology got paid more than the teaching fellows in the Department of Religious Studies. So I jumped at the opportunity. But he says what's happened, even in the glorious city of Pittsburgh, was Pittsburgh has become a world space. Why? Because we have great medical facilities in Pittsburgh. University of Pittsburgh Medical Center draws people from all over the world. And he said, I want you, he said, Pulcini, you're coming from East Liberty, aren't you? Or as they used to say in Pittsburgh, Sliberty. I was living in Sliberty, East Liberty. He says, I want you to count how many languages you hear walking down Fifth Avenue on your way to walk into Oakland. And every block, there's a bus stop. People were catching the bus to go to the heart of Oakland, to the medical center. And there's Arabic at one corner, there was Vietnamese, I think, at another corner, there was Italian at another corner, there was French at another corner, there was non-Pennsylvania English, even people from but there are people from all over. And that's one street. This is what globalization has done. It's not about, some cult or some conspiracy to take over the world. It's about what used to be long ago and far away in another part of the world is now down the street from you, or maybe even next door. When that happens, all the worldviews come together, and Americans do what they do best. They go to the mall and they shop. And so I'll take that from Hinduism, I'll take that from Buddhism, I'll take that from Christianity, I'll take that from Judaism. And this is what blunts the intellectual assent that comes from true faith in a doctrinal system. It's inevitable. It's not that people doing this are bad, they just live in a system, in a societal context where it's unavoidable. And then what you get here, I won't say much about this either, but if I did, I could really vent I could become an extremist here. People want simplicity. Don't bother me with nuance. Nuance is a bad word. I want things simple and straight and black and white and clear boundaries. All right? Rigidity and condemnatory exclusivism makes people closed to opposing views. Now, I think in many ways, the culture in which we live, remember I said when I was growing up, if you were Greek or Orthodox or Italian or Catholic and so forth, that's not true anymore. People are really looking at different viewpoints. One thing I love about the Antiochian Archdiocese, say what you want about the Antiochians, but we have always been receptive to people coming to us from other traditions. And I remember I was saying to John, you were there at the synod meeting in 2019. I think you were there. We had this little soiree at the Patriarch's residence. And there were a few of us who were converts, including Bishop Anthony. And he said, why did you choose to become Antiochian? And I said, now I've been a priest for 40 years. I've never felt like a second-class citizen. I would have felt as a second-class citizen in other ethnic jurisdictions. And you can quote me on that. All right? I never felt that. But if you have a kind of extremist view and an extremely tribal view, all right, you're going to come up with this idea that I want to exclude anything that's not me, as if me is the paragon of what's perfect. All these things chip away at honest intellectual assent to doctrine, which is one essential element of faith. All right? But remember, that's only one half of the $20 bill. Let's look at the other half. Well, materialism, I won't even get into that. It's a problem. Take my word for it. Okay. Corroding the heart of faith, this experiential development, its experiential component. All right. Remember what I said. To have trust in God, you have to be able to have trust in other things. Those of you who have kids who are, say, 25 or younger, you don't need to answer this, but let me ask. Can they trust the government? Can they trust the church? Can they trust the military? Can they trust their neighbors? Can they trust their teachers? Can they trust, name it, fill in the blank? They're a generation. Remember my mother said to me the other day, raising you and your sister, that was a cinch. We trusted everyone. How many parents can say, I trust all the kids, all the people my kids come in contact with. I live in a development in Carlisle, and when the school bus comes to pick up the kids to go to school, their parents walk them to the bus stop or drive them there, wait till they get on the bus, and then they go home. This sounds like an Abraham Lincoln story, but it's true. We used to walk to school in the morning. We used to have to walk home for lunch because the teachers didn't want us to stay there while they were having whatever they were doing at lunchtime. And we used to walk home, eat lunch, and walk back, all within an hour. Now you'd be in court for being traumatizing the students. And then we would walk home. If you were in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, you got out at 4 o'clock, and by the time you were home, it was dark because of the time change. I'm telling you, if you have lack of trust because of scandals and hypocrisy, and you have no experience of trust growing up, I ask you, if you can't trust the person sitting next to you, or the person living next to you, or the authority figure at school or church or whatever, how can you trust in God? This is a problem. And it's not just a legal problem, the way leaders in education or government or church want to look at it. It's an emotional problem. Raising kids without trust. And the trust but verify thing is a very honest attitude that we raise our kids with, and I don't think we're doing wrong in doing that. This is big. People are interested in religion, and this is where Orthodoxy has a particular strength, I think. They don't want a legalistic understanding. If I'm a member of this religion, am I saved? Do I get under the wire to get into heaven? Do I fulfill all the legal requirements of salvation? Who cares about legal requirements? What people want to know, and this is where Bishop Hierotheos, Metropolitan Hierotheos Vlachos, has really, an important point. That salvation for us is basically healing. Therapy, and he even used the word psychotherapy, healing of the soul. We are, every one of us in this room, and I can say this for myself especially, we're all messed up in some way. There's some trauma there, there's something out of whack, and we're smart enough to know that it's not quite right. How do we make it better? And if you go to a faith that sees salvation as healing and tells you how to impart that healing or take advantage of it, accord it to yourself, people are interested. By the way, this fraudster, but he's a very effective fraudster, Joel Osteen, the guy fills stadiums. His sermons are about how they can change their lives. And that's what people want. Orthodoxy has a tremendous, when I was in my graduate work at Harvard, I met Archbishop Chrysostomos, who was a Greek Old Calendars bishop. He became the bishop of Etna in California, now deceased. PhD in psychology from Princeton. I did forgive him for that. But he had a PhD in psychology from Princeton, and he was working on a series of called patristic psychology. And he did it according to vices, anger, lust, whatever, and showed how the patristic tradition offered a way out of captivity to these lusts and how it could improve you. And he worked on it for a while, then his health began to go, and he never finished it, but I thought this is a very worthy project. And I found that people are most receptive to Orthodoxy when they find a therapeutic ethos there that can benefit them. By the way, I have to say, for myself, I've given a number of retreats, and I think the retreat that I've had to repeat in one form or another the most is the one I first gave to clergy on the West Coast. And it was about anger, the vice of anger, which, by the way, is the most corrosive and ubiquitous form of vice anywhere. We all deal with anger somewhere. I have a confession to make. When I used to drive in Boston, I'd take my collar off. Because there were, shall we say, words and gestures that were not fitting. All right? And then when I would get to rehearsal, I put it on and get into the former persona. All right? But this is something that in that clergy retreat, the clergy were so responsive. By the way, if you want to ever have a really threatening experience, stand up in front of 350 guys wearing black and look at you and say, who the hell are you? What are you gonna say? Is it gonna say something I don't believe? I said what I said, but I tell you, this hit a lot of good chords, and I was invited to a lot of their parishes because all of them were dealing with it personally and in their communities. And the therapy, and it wasn't me coming, I'm not a therapist, but I looked at patristic, you know, the thing that I said at the women's, I almost said Iona, but you're not Iona anymore, the Antiochian women's breakfast, about one of the fathers say, visualize the cause of your anger and the person you're angry with. Visualize how you would like to deal with it. Then when you see that person or come up against that struggle, you've already dealt with it. And you know how to be productive. That's a good bit of advice. I use it all the time, especially days before parish council meetings. I used to sit myself down in this chair and say, I know exactly who it's going to be that's going to get under my skin and what stupidity, I mean, what different viewpoint they're going to see. And I would work through it so that when it happened, I wasn't thrown into a fit. All right? This is something that I think we live in a therapeutic society, and we expect organizations to be helping organizations in healing us. If you want to attack faith, if you were the evil one wanting to attack faith, you do all the things that corrode the intellectual assent, and then you start working at these things that corrode the experiential effect. And before you know it, faith withers. And it withers and dies. And by the way, this one I won't say much about. The last thing that eats away at, by the way, 1 hour goes very quickly. But we started 10 minutes late, so let me give you 10 minutes. Okay? Busyness. We're too busy for it. No, and you know what? You're busy for what you really don't care about. If you really care about something, you make the time. All right? It's funny how you can multiply time. What's the word in Arabic when you want to say take your time? Tawal bayna. What that literally means is lengthen your time. Stretch it out. All right? And we do that for what we really want to do, and things we don't want to really do. Sorry, I don't have any time. Are you still breathing? Are you still functioning? Or are you dead? If you're still alive, there is time. So these things, I think, here's the implication of all of this. All this implies that the only way to regain faith is to overcome our falsely reductionistic view of faith as a matter of knowledge and intellectual assent, and to restore its other components, especially trust, entailing obedience. But how can this be done in a secular context where trust is disintegrating? And I'll leave you with this last slide. Public trust in government, 1958 to 2023. This is an actual article from the Pew Research Center. By the way, there are a lot of different groups that publish statistics and analyses. Pew is a reliable one. All right, read what they put out. It's always very good. Now, look at the dates, 1958 and 2023. Public trust in the federal government, which has been low for decades, has returned to near record lows following a modest uptick in 2020 and 2021. Currently, look at this, fewer than 2 in 10 Americans say they trust the government in Washington to do what is right just about always. 1%. I mean, if you're a teacher and you got a review from your students of 1% support, do you think you'd be on the faculty for another semester? And yet these clowns have terms, years, right? Most of the time, 15%. This is among the lowest trust measures in nearly 7 decades of polling. Gee, I don't think it's probably gone up in 2024, right? Last year, 20% said they trusted the government just about always or most of the time, only 20%. And there's the citation for that if you want. So you see what I wanted to do here is give this more nuanced, complete understanding of faith. This has been somewhat theoretical, but I want you to take the basic points that faith, belief is a composite. It has different components. And that people lose their faith because of the corrosion of both aspects of the faith, the mind and the experience of the heart. If you're going to rebuild faith, you've got to address those things. And so the second part of my presentation will be tomorrow at 2:30, I think. 2:30, we'll be looking at some of the practical ways we can remedy this decrease in faith because of a faulty understanding of what faith consists of. All right? And it's 3 after, so I gave you exactly 1 hour. We can take a couple questions. Who comes in here after us?
We have best.
Vespers.
Okay, say it now. As long as Satan is here, you don't have to worry.
Vespers is in the
Those
Mayflower.
headlines that you both showed us.
Vespers
How
is
much
in the
of
Mayflower.
that do you
I think
think
that's
is
where
really
the
about
church is.
reasons why people believe in the faith, and how much of it is putting the message out there so people will start to believe that people are losing their
I
faith?
think the people who chose, let me tell you, there's some kind of agenda.
What was the question?
Okay, he says, you know, all these articles, those what, 10, 15 articles I listed about the decrease in faith, is it because they're just objectively reporting of the reduction of faith, or are these people who want to see faith reduced, and so they're giving you this already? I think, I would say, probably the left, all right? Because all news, whether it's from the left or from the right, I'm not thinking one side or the other, it all becomes propagandistic. And I think these propagandists have a part in it. However, having said that, the propaganda would not work if people reading the propaganda did not find it at least believable. And I think they find it believable because of the same reason you said, yeah, that sort of makes sense to me, because we see actual indications. And that's what propaganda does. It takes a fact that is incontestable, and then it plays emotion. How many of us, I mean, we really, all of us, we have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, who used to be in the church and are not. My sister and I did this one study. As I said, there are 8 kids in my father's family, 4 in my mother's. Of all the aunts and uncles, 12 sets of them, they were all church related. They all had families. My first cousins, I'd say a good 70% of them were church related, among my first cousins. My sister and I did this. But then my first cousins, once removed, the children of my first cousins, the rate of attachment was less than 20%.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think intellectual dissonance always corrupts faith?
No.
That hasn't been my experience.
Oh, I think that's a very good question. If intellectual challenges are done correctly, I consider myself part of this. I mean, to be a good apologist for what you accept and believe, you've got to know what others think. You just can't ignore them. And you have to have a respect for them. To disagree with someone does not give you permission to demonize them or caricature them.
Yeah.
You have to understand what they're really talking about. And, so it's a very good question. I'm glad you brought that up. A good education enables you to understand others, but a good psychological maturation of a process enables you to develop your commitments and be able to explain. How can you explain your faith system to others if you don't know what theirs is assuming? You've got to know their mind. We'll get into this in the second part of the talk. Yes?
Father, you talked about immigrants coming to this country, and many immigrants came, settled in a community, there was a church there.
Yes.
And as those people moved away, as post-industrial towns were hit and people moved, like I think of many of the towns in Connecticut where the churches are almost empty, especially Orthodox churches. Do you feel that perhaps the priests took for granted that people understood the faith so that it could remain when they were no longer in that area within the same community?
Another
and
very
same
good
church?
question. I think a very perceptive question. Yes, I think they assumed it, but they overlooked something. I mean, think about it. My ancestors came to this country. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, never learned English. She lived here for 70 years.
Yeah.
She raised, imagine this, parents, raising your kids speaking a language you did not know. Sometimes you probably feel that now with the slang they use, but I mean, imagine you didn't know the language, all right? They were part of their church and a part of their community because their neighbors understood the language. Their people from the same village living near them understood. So they were there, and I think priests capitalized on this. They were trusted just because they had a cultural connection with them. And people, my grandparents, for instance, trusted their neighbors and the priests and the people. The politicians who were Italian always won elections in Alabama because all the Italians voted for them. Because they would say a few words in Italian and rigatoni, and so they thought, these are our people. They trusted. They trusted them. They didn't know what they believed, but they trusted them because they spoke the same language, came from the same culture, and they figured they're part of our tribe. And to answer your question, then, I think priests always thought that the vitality of faith in their churches was there because people believed. I don't think they believed intellectually. I think they trusted that the other people there were on my side, you know? So, yes, sir.
Could you go back 5 slides?
Oh, well, Richard, where are you? You may need help with this. Let me try.
Can you move your knee a little bit?
1, 2,
Hard question.
You're doing fine, keep coming.
3, 4, 5.
Actually, go forward 1.
Oh,
Sorry.
come on.
Yeah, that one.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to reread.
Oh, okay. Yes,
You know how you said they kept repeating it in the newspaper?
yes,
And I think when people keep saying the same thing over and over again, they start to believe it.
absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. That's nature propaganda, isn't it?
Right.
And if you really want people to remember it, set it to music. Or come up with a jingle, like, if it does not fit, you must quit. I mean, you forget all the details, but you remember the little thing.
Right,
We're
right.
an advertising society. So what sells products? Little jingles, music, imagery. Celebrity, very good. Yes, ma'am.
When you had said that if we have faith in people, we're able to have faith in God. So I have a question. My personal experience in the past was that, dealing in a healing ministry prior to being Orthodox, one of the biggest, healings that needed to take place was healing of the image of the Father. Because so many people in the wheelhouse I was in had come from abusive homes or absentee fathers or things of that nature, or just things where a dad would say one thing and do another and be hypocritical. And I found a huge proportion of women in the Wiccan religion, they have like no trust in a male figure. And have you found that in
No.
Orthodoxy at
Yes,
all?
one of the reasons, I think, I preached on this last Sunday, as a matter of fact, because remember last Sunday was secular holiday, what secular holiday?
Father's Day.
And it was the fathers of the First Ecumenical Council. And I made the connection between fatherhood in the Orthodox faith, which is still respected. For us, God is above all else, Father. What do we say in the creed? I believe in one God. God is Father for us. His Son. By the way, you can't have a father without a child. The reason why Christ is the Son of God is because he has a father. And where does the Spirit? This is testing your Orthodox doctrine. And I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. The Father is the source of that. Go to other churches where God is feminized. Fatherhood is either ignored or downplayed or rejected. If you're a young man and you want to be, by the way, there's an alternative between being part of this feminized, defatherized Christianity on one hand and being Andrew Tate on the other.
He's not a Christian.
I know, but there are people who follow him. And I'm saying those are extremes. In between is a genuine Orthodox understanding of masculinity, which involves a positive image of the Father. I found that even in teaching. Some of you who teach, if you're a male teaching, a lot of my students, really became close to me because they needed a father image. And I always took that very seriously. I've never betrayed that. But you can see how pet predators do that.
Yeah.
And how they betray. So it's a very dangerous situation, but you put your finger on the pulse. With the lack of positive father imagery and the need for it in healthy development, both psychologically and physically, we have the emphasis on fatherhood as a positive thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are attracted to Orthodoxy. And you know what? When I was ordained, I got a letter from an older priest. He said, you're going to be ordained next week. People are going to call you father all the time. You must take that seriously. Because some of them are so messed up to begin with, you don't want to make it worse. So, and on athletic teams, talk to any coach. How many of their team members, the young men on the football team, don't have a strong father image? And the coach becomes that. Teachers, fathers. It used to be, in the past, clergy, now the clergy have become so distrusted in the general public that isn't really part of the system that's emphasized by families anymore. So,
I wonder if you can just speak to Mother Teresa, who's talked about like a 40-year loss of faith or absence of experience of God, but it seems that in her life, by her fruit, she still trusted, even though she didn't experience the presence of God. So that's something is a subtle distinction.
no, it's a great point. But you may, what was his name? Who was the American? William James, the great American writer on religion, said if you want to believe and you want to come to true faith, act in accord with what true faith would require you to do. In other words, do it, and then the faith follows. In other words, if I believe in the sense that I know what's required of me, if I say I want to be a believing Christian and live that way, gradually the experiential dimension is added to it. Act, don't think, because people, what do kids say? I don't want to go to church because I don't feel anything, or I don't get anything from it. And I say, that's why you should haul your butt there. Until you know enough, you can't say that. Just because it doesn't appeal to you, step out of it, you little brat. This isn't about you. This is about the human situation. And for countless generations, people smarter than you, better than you, have found meaning in having this absolute backdrop in their life.
Here.
You can find the same thing. So step out of it, and you're not impressing me with your bravado.
So is it
So they don't come to my church. Good, good.
Is it possible to like live and engage in a pluralistic world and society while maintaining an exclusive doctrine?
Yes. Here's the way I look at it. In this multifaceted world, in this pluralistic world, I'm providing an option. I'm providing a good option. And I believe one thing about Americans, they're good shoppers. They see a better option, they're going to go for it. And what's the better option? You know, I saw this movie once, and I loved it. I had a crush for years on Marsha Mason. You know who Marsha Mason was? The actress. She was in this movie called Only When I Laugh. I love that film. And there's one scene where she has great respect for her daughter, and she's arguing with her daughter. And in one scene, she says, "When I grow up," she says to her daughter, "I want to be just like you." And I think most people do that. They see someone, they say, "When I grow up, I want to be just like him, or just like her." And, you know, I think that that's what we need to do. We need to have a faith that we believe enough about intellectually and experientially to want to live it. And in living it, we provide an alternative, a genuine alternative for people. So, and that, I believe, let me tell you, William James was right. You want to believe? Act as if you do, and you will in time. But if you say, I'm not going to believe until I really feel it. Do you feel it every morning? I don't. Especially on Sunday morning sometime. You know, the last place you want to be is church, but you go. And you go, and the people who are there saying, you know, when I was in Chambersburg, I lived in Carlisle and would drive to the parish in Chambersburg during lunch, sometimes 4 times a week. And I remember one woman said, "Father, I don't like coming to these evening services, but I figure if you can drive to get here 35 miles, I can drive 2 miles to get here." Yeah. So this is the point. You know? And I think what I tell priests, you know, my students in the Anglican House of Studies, never expect anything from your people that you first don't model to them. So whenever we had like Pledge Sunday, I always made sure I was the first one to submit my pledge to the treasurer. And I think that that's what has to happen. People long for an example. They want, listen, aren't you guys all celebrating the Celtics victory? We all want heroes. We all want to be like people. That's why the whole celebrity cult is so big. Provide a celebrity, a religious celebrity presence to people, and you know what? Be that celebrity presence, and they'll want to be like you. And Mother Teresa is a good example of that. People, you know, people were shocked when they said, "Oh, she had this dark night of the soul for 40 years." Well, any religious person who doesn't have a long period of dark night of the soul is either on drugs or should be. All right? So, you know, but you know, these newscasters, oh my God, she had doubts.
Right.
Well, hello.
Yeah.
Anyone who takes her faith seriously, how would they not have doubts?
I'm getting, it's good to be old and retired because you don't have to care what you say. Yes, thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Richard, thank you for your technical advice. Now you can turn this off. Well, I